Welcome to Build Different, the construction industry's podcast sponsored by Kahua, the world's first project management information system built to enable the industry to innovate. I'm your host, Nicholas Johnson, and today's episode we're calling Building with the End in Mind. My guest is none other than Kahua founder and president, Brian Moore. Brian, welcome to Build Different.
Well, thank you, Nicholas. Let me say I'm excited to be here because I think this podcast format is an easy way to disseminate knowledge, especially for our industry where everybody is always on the move. It's a convenient way for them to digest the information. So thank you very much.
Well, today our topic is asset-centric project management. It's a new methodology that requires some technology to enable it. And Brian, let me ask you to start off by giving a definition of asset-centric. And keep in mind that our audience might not have ever heard of this before seeing this podcast advertised.
Yeah, let me start off by saying I think everyone understands the definition and value of a project management system today. Asset-centric is using the same project management solutions, but with an asset-centric lens. And what I mean by that is we're creating the same documents, but now we're linking these documents to the assets we're putting into place. So now everything is centered around the asset.
All right. Let me ask then, why does it matter? What makes asset-centric worth talking about and much less worth changing my methodology slightly for?
Well, there's many reasons, but let me maybe try to bucket that into three themes. The first one would be is over 95% of the data that gets created in design and construction gets unused. From our perspective, that's a gold mine of information that could drive the owner to be able to make better decisions in the future.
Yeah.
Second, I think that the handover process, it's been a real problem for many players for decades. Not just the owner, the subcontractor, and the general contractor. It is an inefficient process. It's very costly for everybody involved. And more importantly, when you go out there and have conversations with owners, they'll tell you today that they probably prefer the paper process versus the media that they get the content in today. And I think, maybe finally you kind of summarize that. I think it matters to this industry because we have been so project-centric focused, and we basically focus on one project and we move on to the next one so fast. But if I'm an owner, do I really care about the 20,000 submittals, the 1,000 issues, the 2,000 change orders that get created? Or would it be more important for me to be able to have an asset and have all those documents associated with it? So it really is just a mindset shift. And again, the tools that we use during design and construction are great for design and construction. And all we're doing is putting this asset lens on top of a PMIS system. So now in creating the same documents, we're adding enormous value for the owner downstream.
So we're going to use the same tools, the same business processes. We're still going to do submittals and ask questions through RFIs, and there will probably be change orders. We're just improving the way that we do those things so that we capture this data?
Correct. It is the same business processes. We're not making modifications to what a subcontractor or general contractor is currently doing. All we're asking them to do, it's no different when you're going through and creating a document where you may identify a location or identify a CSI code. You're just identifying an asset in which you're doing that document on.
Okay, so not a lot of burden to the design and construction team. You met with hundreds of owners to talk about this. What stories did you hear from them about the problem in getting this data from design and construction phases to their operations folks?
So let me set the stage first here. We interviewed over 250 owners, and we kind of validated the core problem, which we call the project after the project, which is still an underlying problem, and that really is the handover process. Unfortunately, today, majority of the owners are still getting little value from that handover process. The data that they get is incomplete. It's not in a good format for them to be able to consume. And what we have been able to validate ourselves is, unfortunately, and this is a theme in the industry, that data gets entered in over 4 times by various constituents. So again, just an enormous amount of duplicate data entry. And again, when you put this in context, this is always usually happening at the end of the project. Everybody on the team is scrambling to get off the project to get onto their next project. And then you look at it from the owner's perspective, then they get all this data from the contractor, and it usually takes them over a year before they get that information into their system. So you can see that there's a lot of challenges that the owner is faced with. So what we do is we kind of walk through with all the constituents. Our request is, when we meet with an owner, is we ask them to get all the downstream users of the data into a room and have a discussion. And we talk about all the problems that they are having once they get that information when the project is over, and all the problems that they had for the next 30 to 40 years. So this could be your O&M department, it could be finance, it's compliance, it's insurance, it's IT. And I think what's really exciting is when you get that group of people together and start talking about the challenges and issues that you have, there are many drop the mic moments that occur. And again, I'll just give you a few examples, but I thought it was important to kind of set that stage, because literally you can walk away from that room from 20 to 30 examples. One which was an owner was using the wrong solvent to clean the curtain wall, and they had to replace it. And again, I think what's just so ironic there is, the individual that was doing it, no harm, no foul, but it's because they didn't have the information readily available. And that's usually the case as to why all these problems occur. This other one is very funny, because I think I've heard this every time I've been with an owner. But somebody was doing work on a rooftop chiller, and one of the managers kind of came up and was just having a dialogue with the individual and asked, is that asset under warranty? And the individual goes, I don't know. Well, and the manager kind of replied, it doesn't matter, we now own it. I mean, there's so many costs that occur on an ongoing basis. And I think another great example is one that we need to be very understanding about going forward in the future, and that is around security, because the concept of cybersecurity is only getting worse, and more assets are being installed that have access to the internet. So there was a casino that had a thermometer and a fish tank, so you wouldn't think that would be a big issue,
Right.
but it was connected to the internet. And so you had a bad actor that was able to break into the system and actually steal information. And again, it's because that the IT department didn't know about that asset that was connected to the internet. That took several, you go a year by, there's numerous number of patches that need to be made on that asset that were not made. So the stories go on and on and on. And the root of the problem is the owner's getting so much content when they're in the process of either bringing the plant aboard or bringing the facility aboard and moving people in. They don't have that time during that transition period to take this content that's not in the right format in order to give it to all the other downstream people that need that information to be successful.
Yeah. So from an owner's perspective, they have tools that they use to maintain and operate their facilities, their equipment. They've got things that help them keep up with warranty issues and so forth. But those tools need this data. And as an industry, we've done a very poor job in delivering it in a way that they can use it. Does that kind of summarize what we've said so far?
It does, Nicholas. And again, I think that one thing that we have to realize as an industry is that we've created a lot of tools in the marketplace that really serve the purpose for the individuals at hand. But the fundamental problem in this industry is majority of the business processes cross between companies, and more importantly, every single customer out there downstream needs that data that was put in to the system that works great for the system that was using it in order for them to be effective. And this is a fundamental problem that exists in this industry with so much duplicate data entry, not having visibility to the data to help people being able to make better decisions.
Okay, so we need the data when we turn over the asset, whether it's a facility or a utility or a highway. The owner needs that data right away, and there's a problem either having to rebuild that database because what we've delivered isn't formatted in a way they can use it. Can I assume that's why 95+% of data goes unused? It's because we're not delivering it in a way that's very usable?
I think the majority of it, that would be the case.
Yeah. So if we can improve that and turn the keys over with a working database, we've solved thousands of problems and saved millions of dollars probably.
I think the key thing there, Nicholas, is the fact that an owner doesn't know what they don't know.
Right.
And by giving them the information that they need in the format that they can consume, or at least giving them the opportunity to have the insight as to what is happening, or why did things happen during design and construction? Why were there issues? Why were there change orders? Why is it that we had all these design review problems, whatever it may be, or punch list items that have occurred? Or it could even be a new material that no one has any experience in installing.
Right.
Wouldn't it be great to know, from the design team or construction team, did they have any issues in installing or working with that new material?
Right. Like that curtain wall.
Yep.
Maintenance people probably use the solution that they've always used on all of their buildings. This time it was the wrong idea. Okay. So if it doesn't take much effort or it's really not any substantial change to the process for the designer, constructor, subcontractor, how do we set all this up? How does it work? What's the kind of fundamentals behind making asset-centric project management the methodology that an owner wants to use?
Yeah, I think there's two things. One, of course, change is never easy, but from a process perspective, what I would say is instead of everything being at the end of the process when everyone is leaving the job site, what we're trying to accomplish here is we're moving the collection of the key information at the appropriate stages along the life cycle. So, for example, when a submittal gets approved, we should collect the key documents and attributes that the owner wants at that point in time. Or when an asset gets installed, it would be great to be able to collect the serial number or the date installed when the asset gets installed. Now it's part of the process as compared to being an afterthought at the end of the project. And then if you think about it, if everything is then digital, then that will provide the owner and the general contractor that knowledge, right? That dashboard, that insight as to whether they have all the data and documents required at that point in time. And then if that is the case, here's the key benefit. If I'm an owner and I have a 4-year project, and in year 1 an asset gets installed, there's no reason why that information couldn't be passed digitally from the asset-centric PMI system to the CMMS system. And that is critical because if I am in the O&M team and everybody else downstream, the sooner I can get the information, the more proactive I can be in building out my plan for the next 30 to 40 years.
So, for example, if a submittal item is created, a designer says we're going to use a piece of switchgear or air handler, if that's passed immediately to the operator's tool set, then that operator can raise their hand and say, hey, we've had trouble with that switchgear, we've had trouble with that air handler, let's pick something different.
Well, hopefully that gets resolved before the actual asset gets approved. But let me take you along the lines of that asset has been approved. So we've gone through the overall process. We've approved that asset. Everyone's been involved in that. Okay. But at that point in time, though, why is it if we've defined here are the 3 documents that we want associated to that asset, or here are the 5 attributes associated with the asset, at that point in time in the process, now we've made it very easy because it's part of the process. So again, imagine today in most projects, what's happening is a subcontractor is probably sending somebody out that's not the same person that installed all the assets. So again, an extremely inefficient process that we have. We're now bringing everything up front and just part of the process as you're going along.
Okay, excellent. Well, beyond CMMS, the tools that the owner uses for kind of general planning and for maintenance, what other systems is data being passed electronically back and forth between?
Well, I think everybody knows the value of BIM during design and construction, but once it's handed over to the owner, there's massive data degradation of information within the model, and that's a big problem for the owner. And I think that's where BIM hasn't lived up to its expectations. Fantastic design and construction, but from an owner's perspective, for the next 30 to 40 years, it's a big challenge. Well, if you have all this asset information as part of all the projects, whether they're large projects or if they're small projects, and we're able to integrate that information, right? Dynamically pass that information. You can start off with the model and pass it to the PMIS system. But once you're collecting this information, as I just mentioned, it can dynamically pass that information, appropriate information, back to the model. Now the model is a living kind of like entity on an ongoing basis that you don't have to be concerned about feeding. And again, this is why it kind of goes back to, having systems in place that you're continuously feeding electronically, dynamically, versus us creating sheets and documents in one system and then having somebody else have to recreate. And the other one I could think about, which would be great, is of course, we see a lot of people that utilize Esri. Sure. And wouldn't it be great to be able to see a visualization of all of our assets on a map, maybe instead of a list or a log?
Excellent. So Esri is the GIS tool of choice. If an owner uses a different Esri tool or a different kind of BIM tool, would we be able to pass data to those as well?
Yes. And so I think you kind of brought up a key fundamental component that has to occur somewhat up front from an owner's perspective. And that is the owner just has to define what assets are important to me and what attributes are important to me. And once they go through that definition, it becomes so much easier then to identify, because that's where you have to have that consistency across all the systems that you're utilizing. You can't have it call it one definition in one system and something else in a different system. So that's a process that we go through with owners to make sure that they have a common dictionary of language that they utilize. So it makes it very easy to digitally pass information from one system to the next.
Okay, excellent. So that's 3 or 4 systems where we're removing the duplication of data. Are there other things that you think of?
Yeah, actually, one I forgot to mention that is probably one that's just been hot on our radar screen here lately, just because of the value proposition, is really around what's called a facility condition assessment. Facility condition assessments, like a lot of things in this industry, it hasn't changed in decades. And basically a facility condition assessment is an organization, maybe every 3 to 5 years, they'll have an outside firm come in and they'll do an assessment of all their assets in their portfolio. So it takes a good while for an organization to do that, but a report gets produced. And that report is not different than what it was reported 3 to 4 decades ago. And it usually goes untouched.
How do you mean that?
Well, the report, once it's created for the owner, it has a very specific intent and purpose. And that intent and purpose is to go get a bond, or it's basically helping justify a capital program that they may be doing, or getting an understanding. But the problem is that's usually produced in a PDF or it's produced in a booklet. So it's usually something that has a purpose for maybe 30 days. But if you ask anybody in the industry, it usually then goes on the shelf, and the constituents really aren't able to harness that information. Things change immediately. 6 months, 9 months down the road, it's not something that's managed on an ongoing basis.
And this facility condition assessment was a snapshot in time. It was accurate the moment we captured the information. Probably by the time we put it in the binder, something's already changed. And certainly a week later, if there's been a roof leak and it leaked on the electrical system, then the condition of the facility is very different at that point. So the solution is what?
Well, first and foremost, I think what's really exciting about this is for a lot of the customers out there, this is a really big pain point, because this costs millions of dollars. This is not something that's a small venture from an owner's perspective. And again, it takes an enormous amount of time. And again, I think what's really important here is to try to get that information, instead of it being a stagnant book or report, is how do we look at this and try to create a continuous facility assessment? That's something that can cover us not just from doing that one-time assessment, but that also can cover us once we're doing new construction, and also cover us from a maintenance perspective. And so I want to kind of point this out because I think this is really critical. We use this word all the time, but as you can see, we try to call these assets the golden thread. It is the lowest common denominator that links all these systems together, and hence why we're linking these documents to an asset as they go through the life cycle. So whether it is a facility condition assessment, whether it is new construction, an asset coming aboard, whether it is some type of maintenance program, this industry needs to be thinking about how can we create a system of process that's more of a continuous facility assessment versus a snapshot in time, whether it is the facility condition assessment, whether it is construction, and even on the maintenance side. Again, there's so much information and data that's created for the next 30 to 50 years, but it doesn't have insight to the previous several decades. So I think that's probably the biggest thing here is looking at it more from a how do we create a system and a process so that the data continuously flows between all the various systems that exist.
So Brian, that's several systems of data, that's several places where we duplicate data that we can now eliminate those silos and kind of tie it all together with this asset-centric methodology. Are there other things that you can think of that will allow us to reuse that data and not have to continually recreate silos of information?
Yeah, again, I think this is what's great about when you start looking at a lot of these different business processes. We put ourselves in an opportunity to continuously improve as an industry. And I think as we were looking at, for example, the facility condition assessment process in itself, we were able to work with various partners out there in the industry, and one of them came up with the idea of creating a new application to, collect all this information that, again, and historically, people would utilize Excel. But the value proposition is they looked at it from the perspective of if we were able to collect this information in this application, and again, look downstream to the next step in the process. How can we digitally pass all that information from their system so that the owner has in their hands, instead of a booklet, they actually have an application that they can utilize and harness to downstream pass information as new construction information comes in or those assets change. That's the concept of a continuous facility assessment. We now collect all this information about the portfolio of assets that we have. We're able to pass that information on, and as we do new construction that removes assets or we do maintenance on those assets, we are now building this knowledge base of information around the assets within our portfolio.
All right, so you've solved the problem of asset data handover, get all the data and all the documents when you open your new facility, and now you've got that in a place where it can be used by other applications. I assume then this continues to live and analytics can be applied against that. I can think of lots of examples of how we might use the data. What did owners say, or what have we thought about is how analytics can be applied to the data now that we've got one place for all this to rest?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Nicholas. I think the concept is owners are now in a position to be able to tell a story around their assets. I told you before that I went out and I interviewed about 250 owners.
Wow.
One of the first questions that I would ask an owner is, do you mind sharing with me what you present to the board about your portfolio of assets? And not shockingly, I have yet to have somebody present something that they could share with me. And I think that's the value proposition here is by having this concept of a continuous facility assessment, we now can do analytics across all the assets that exist within our portfolio. And I think it does a couple things. First, as an owner, let's just say I have a constraint. I only have $40 million in my O&M budget. By being able to do analytics, we can now make better decisions about how to allocate that $40 million across our portfolio. Or more importantly, how can we utilize that information that we have to do what-if scenarios to help us in our capital planning? And again, to kind of go through iterations around based upon whatever criteria we've established associated against our assets, we can start creating what-if scenarios. Okay, this what-if scenario would cost us $5 million. This what-if scenario could cost us $7 million. So it can help an organization be much more proactive in analyzing all the information, again, to make better decisions. But I think the key thing here is we're changing the process so that it's not every 3 to 5 years we're bringing in somebody to spend millions of dollars to tell us what's going on at a snapshot in time. We now have a process in place. We still may have consultants come in, but it's not something where we're spending millions of dollars. It's a dramatic change for how things are done.
I've got most of the information in my hand at any given time.
Yeah.
I still have to go lay eyes on a few things, but generally I know the condition of my facilities and the assets they contain. That's pretty powerful. Okay, if this is going to make such great changes in the industry, how are we going to get designers, contractors, subcontractors, and owners all on the same page with this new process?
That's a great question. But this is where I would say it's not just about the technology. It's about change management and process changes. We've been very lucky here to have an experience with the previous company that we own called Constructware, where we took the industry from a land to an internet. And it wasn't just about the technology. It was about how do we take people who for decades have been doing things one way, and now it's completely different. People didn't understand what does it mean to have our data in the cloud. So I look at this as when we go in and we have conversations, this is an opportunity to bring everybody together, to innovate collectively, to continuously improve on processes that, again, as I stated up front, these are business processes that flow between all the parties. So we basically work with the owner up front to create what we call an asset-centric playbook. And the objective of that playbook is to get the owner to define for themselves what is important to me, what assets do I want to track, what attributes, what documents do I need to be successful for everybody downstream. And what's so valuable here is, again, you can take the crawl, walk, run approach. An owner can put into place, okay, let's just track these 5 assets, and maybe it's only 5 attributes. Well, the key thing here is when you work with all your constituents, you define the playbook, a step-by-step guide of what the new process will look. What's more important is that new process gets put into place that everybody is utilizing. Then it becomes very easy for the owner in the future to say, oh, in order for us to be successful, let's start tracking these additional attributes. Or let's not just do it for 5, let's do it for 10 or for 15.
Excellent. All right, we've talked a lot about the benefit to the owner. If change management has got to be part of this, one of the principles of change management is to help people understand why it's good for not just individual team members, why it's good for the team, why it's good for me. So how does this help? Because I perceive that it does. How does it help the contractor at the end of the project?
Well, when you say at the end of the project, let me take a step back from that question and say, if, again, over the past couple decades, and this is going to conferences, I mean, there were a lot of conferences where this was the topic every single year, how do we solve the handover process? If I'm a subcontractor, as I kind of stated before, usually what happens in today's process is Brian Moore may be the person that went out and installed all the assets. But at the end of the project, we're probably sending somebody else out. So that can't be very efficient for that owner of that subcontractor company to have somebody go into a truck and go to that job site for a second time just to collect information when there was somebody there that could have collected it in a few seconds, right? Or if I'm the general contractor, again, most general contractors, they may utilize Excel. They disperse that Excel spreadsheet that they got from the owner in terms of what information they want collected. Do they want to be spending all their time assimilating all that information across many trades into a document they can pass on to the owner? So I think what's kind of ironic, and I asked this question a lot recently to general contractors when I speak to them, is have you ever asked the owner, is what I'm giving you in the asset handover process adding you any value? And again, I've yet to meet an owner when we start off this conversation around the asset information that they get. They're not seeing much value. And more importantly, it's a big problem for them. And majority of the time, I ask them to open up the drawer in front of them, and there's the media or information from that previous project that they completed. And again, I think this is, I state that just because we go through a process here sometimes that something is defined in the spec that we must do, and we just check the box. And I just think this has just been a great opportunity for the industry, for everybody to collectively get together and start working on improving this business process, because everybody benefits from it.
So the subcontractor, contractor go to a lot of trouble and expense to create a product that is a contractual obligation, but it's a product that they're not proud of or happy with. It's just something we have to do because it's in the contract.
Well, and again, I think when you look at the end of the project, though, and I know that you're on the road with me a lot too, and having a lot of these discussions, and we hear a lot of owners make comments to us that it's a year later and they still don't have all the closeout information that they need, and yet they're retaining funds that the general contractor and subcontractor should be paid for. So, I mean, when you think about it from that perspective, I think we have an enormous opportunity here to dramatically change the closeout process and not think about it as being at the end and being something that's more continuous, and really streamline the process for everybody involved, and then more importantly, make the money flow to the appropriate parties.
Excellent. So there really is something in it for each party. All right, I'm going to try to recap. Asset-centric project management starts with coordination of the operator, setting up what assets we'll track and what they do in a CMMS system or other system. It requires very little work or no extra work from the project participants, and it saves both the owners and the contracting team incredible amounts of time, energy, and budget. Did I get that right?
Yes, you got that correct.
All right, it's a real game changer. It's got to be a game changer for our industry. What would keep anyone from moving forward in doing this? Have you heard any resistance to what we're trying to do?
No, have not. And again, what's been exciting is just going through this process. I think people in this industry sometimes just need to see other people take the leadership, take that first step to get the mass market to, I believe. And I think as people start going through this process of shifting from just a project management, as I mentioned, when you get everybody together, all these value points really rise up. You start seeing the dollars. This is such an enormous opportunity from an owner's perspective in order to save an enormous amount of money, not only in the short term, which is kind of commissioning for the 2 years where there's an enormous amount of costs that occur, but really from a life cycle perspective. We all know, from this industry, a small amount is what it costs to build the facility or the building, but the majority of the cost is in the next 30 to 50 years. And I think that's what's so important is we're trying to set the owner up, for success. And that's where, a term we always utilize at Kahua is I would encourage owners to begin with the end in mind. What's the end result here? What do you want to achieve? And it's usually around the assets, right? It's not just about the facade of the building. It's what's the objective of that building or that plant that we're creating here. And it really revolves around what are the key assets that we're putting into place. So again, I kind of mentioned this a couple of times, but I would start your project thinking about assets as being that golden thread that feeds so many systems downstream, but more importantly, feeds so many constituents downstream. So when you start a new project, look at it from that perspective. And then by doing that, you're putting yourself in a position to be successful in managing your portfolio of assets. Again, having an understanding of your assets within your portfolio. And use this opportunity as an owner to innovate with all your partners. And the only way this change is going to happen in this industry is if the owner drives the change. They're the ones that are the recipient of this. They're the ones that have to live with whatever is created. So it's an enormous opportunity for them to think differently, to look at the systems differently in terms of how systems can integrate, how information can flow, what the needs are for everybody to be successful.
So borrowing from Stephen Covey's begin with the end in mind, we say build with the end in mind.
Yes, that's great.
Right, excellent. So Brian, let me back up for just a moment. I want to ask, how did this idea really get started? What's the genesis of it? I understand that these were conversations that happened years ago, but we really started talking to a lot of owners about it just a couple years ago. Can you just give us a little background on how we got started down this path for asset-centric project management?
Yeah, I think I kind of mentioned this before, but Scott Unger and I, we created a company called Constructware back in 1994. And at that time, our beachhead was a general contractor. And when we built Kahua, we basically built out a life cycle solution. So from planning, design, procurement, construction to operations. So as we've continued to evolve that offering, we basically have looked at a lot of the different business processes that exist. And we kind of got to this point where we realized again that we were just creating so much information. And again, analytics and continuity of data is just so critical that we just saw that, wait a minute, we're creating all this information, but then everything is dropping off. And then more importantly, everyone has known for so long the cost to maintain and build a facility as compared to construct. And we just saw this opportunity really from commissioning for the first 2 years, where again, in going out with meeting so many people, there's just an enormous cost that exists. And that's kind of where the opportunity came about. And again, as you know, Nicholas, at conferences, this has been a topic for decades that we've discussed. So I think we've known that there's a problem that's been there, but I don't think there's been a means or a method in order to solve the problem.
All right, excellent. So Brian, I've got a few rapid fire questions I want to throw at you. I want to give you just a few seconds to answer these. So if you're ready, I'm going to throw a few things at you.
Go ahead.
All right. Just name us name for us one of your industry hot takes. What's the latest industry hot take you've got for us?
I would say that's AI. But can I put some caution to the wind, even though
Sure.
you only gave me a couple seconds from that perspective?
Sure.
Because again, I think what's so important here is we learned so much in 1997 to 2000 for those that were part of the dot-com kind of boom. And that is, no one knew what the internet was. Then all of a sudden, every single day for several years, that's all you hear about is the internet. And everyone gets educated. There's such euphoric out there. And all of a sudden, there was a crash. But then it came back so strong. And I'm not saying that AI is going to follow the exact same path, but again, no one heard about AI several years ago. And then all of a sudden, it's in every single email, every single day. You see another webinar, another topic, another meeting to go to about AI. And what I caution the industry on is just like the internet days or any other technology that comes about, we need to be focused on use cases, not just AI broad, but what are the specific use cases that can make a dramatic change in this industry?
All right, excellent. Okay, next rapid fire.
Rapid fire.
Talk about the most surprising thing that you've heard along the way when you talk to owners about asset-centric, about the way they manage their assets.
I think the most surprising, and again, we're talking about some very large organizations that we've been having, conversations with, is the fact that they had no knowledge of their assets that were in their portfolio.
Wow. All right. As an innovator, next rapid fire. As an innovator, what's the one thing that you tried and you were wrong about? What did you learn from that?
Yeah, well, let me go back to the Constructor days. Even though Constructor was extremely successful, I think one of the things that we created with Constructor, we thought we created, was a much better way to collaborate. And I think we did create a solution that was better than the previous one. But we also created the next generation problem from that perspective, which is one person won and everybody else loses because everyone's collaborating on one person system. And hence, part of this discussion today is the value proposition of the data, having your own project record and it digitally passing between companies.
Excellent. Great answer. All right. Final question. One word to describe your future or the future of the industry, or both.
One word, 2 words, true collaboration.
Excellent. All right. The question we like to ask at the end of every podcast is this: where can the listener go to learn more about this topic, asset-centric project management?
Beyond our website, I think I've asked, and hopefully there'll be a list of resources to be posted in our LinkedIn recap. So hopefully that'll be there.
Okay, excellent. So I'll remind the audience, we hope you can join us next month, as our topic for our next podcast will be prioritizing mental health and safety in construction. Brian, really enjoyed this. Thanks for being with us today. Look forward to doing this again.